Hey everyone, this is Erica, the host of the Just Say Maybe podcast. Thanks for being here. Today I have a very special guest. His name is Shaun Flores, and I'm really excited to talk to him about all of his work on OCD and anything else we end up talking about today. So, hey Shaun, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erica, for the opportunity for me to come onto your podcast. We were speaking obviously previously in the past. I'm a big fan of what you're doing as well, and I'm happy in the space that I'm in, especially collaborating with advocates, activists such as yourself. It's not easy, but it's nice to be part of a very powerful and strong community.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And we'll get into a lot of your advocacy and public speaking work as well, because I'd like to know more about that. But first, let's start with a question that I usually start off my guests with, which is just what thing that you wish other people knew about you, or that you think other people should know about you, but that most people don't know about you.
That I'm quite naturally introverted more than I am extroverted. Funnily enough, I think a lot of
Mm.
people see the work that I do and they assume that, oh, I'm super sociable, I'm super extroverted, and to some regard I am. But I would actually say, funny enough, I'm more introverted. It's just my level of courage always outweighs my level of fear. So I still feel anxiety when I want to do public speaking or go out to certain places, but I always just try to remember that if I'm anxious about something, right, anxiety's always got a peak and it drops. But if I stop doing the things I really want to do, I'm taken away from a day in my future. That's quite typically how I try to think about it. So, yeah, that I am naturally a lot more introverted, but I'm on a goal and I'm on a mission to help people. So that always is going to be the one thing that propels and pushes me forward.
Yeah, that's interesting that you chose a path of being around a lot of people and talking to lots of people when you're more naturally introverted. Is that hard sometimes? Do you feel like that drains your social battery? Like, how does that
Y-
work for you?
Yeah, and it's. I was going to ask you what is something that you people don't know about you, but obviously I'll let you answer that afterwards. But I would say, yeah, there's times I definitely do feel burnout, and I think it's because I do so much, and maybe it's an ADHD thing. I still need to get an ADHD diagnosis, and I need to actually chase that up. Funny enough, because I align with some of ADHD, not entirely all of it, but we know obviously with OCD and ADHD, there's high crossovers and so on. But
Right.
I definitely feel burnout. I definitely feel like sometimes my social battery is exhausted. Some days I just want to decompress. I don't want to do anything. So what I've started to do now is in between breaks, between meetings or going out to meet people, I just do something I want to do. Relax. It could be something as simple as before I jumped on this call, I did a face mask, and it was just nice, a nice little 20-minute face
Oh,
mask, and I just
wow.
relax. Sometimes it's just nice to do those simple things because
For
I think,
sure.
especially in this hustle culture and this kind of idea that we always have to be working, we always have to be productive, we forget sometimes the most productive thing that we can do is be productive with ourselves and take care of ourselves before looking after the needs of others. So that's something I've
Yeah.
really realized. But for yourself, what's something about yourself that you wish other people knew?
You know what's funny? In I would say like a quarter of my episodes, everyone has turned the question back on me.
Of
And I
course.
honestly I can't remember what what I've said at this point. I mean, I think one of the things I've said is that like I mean, I consider myself extroverted, but I don't know if it's I have a friend who's really into Myers-Briggs, and she always says ENFPs, which is like my personality type, are the most introverted extroverts. And I think it's more just like I sometimes have a little bit of like a serious slash like stank face. I'm around people who I'm just not really vibing with. Like mostly strangers, like mostly strange men who are approaching me to guess what my race is or speak Chinese to me. Like those are the people I usually have a stank face with, which is so I just don't appear extroverted, I guess, like when that's happening. But I feel like I can spend a lot of time, like literally I can spend days on end with people I really, really enjoy spending time with. And I kind of feel like and I don't get tired of that. I don't feel drained from doing that. So I kind of feel like that's a form of extroversion that people don't really talk about as much or think about as much because most of the time people think about extroversion as like you just talk to strangers and you're cool with being in settings where you don't know anyone, um, which I feel like is hard if you have like a little bit of social anxiety paired with just being extroverted in general. Like I don't know, I think there's a difference between getting your energy from being around people and being able to talk to anyone, and being really outgoing. And I think people equate being outgoing and extroversion. So that's what I would say.
It's true. It's a very fair point. I need to do the Myers-Briggs test again, and there's another couple of tests I actually really would like to do. But I think it's a really good point that even my therapist told me. She said she thinks I'm an ambivert. I think that was the
Oh
right. I
yeah.
think that was the term she used. I think naturally I'm more introverted, but I've got extroverted qualities. Whereas some introverts, when you speak to them, it's almost like trying to bleed a stone. Sometimes it can be incredibly difficult. Then some extroverts, it can be you feel like you're having a kitchen sink thrown at you with all their energy.
That's right. Yeah, like some people I have a really hard time matching their energy with, and I can feel my face like freezing and looking just really fake. I don't know. But then there are some people, like you said, like it's really hard to bring out their social energy, which is it's okay. Like everyone, has their thing. But I think I typically am a person who's drawn to like most of my friends, I would say, are more introverted in general. So it's like I think I'm drawn to that because I'm probably more on the introvert extrovert side. But anyways, yeah. Um, cool. Well, that's good to know. Yeah. So can you just tell us a little bit about maybe I know you've talked in other podcasts about your mental health story, so I don't want to like necessarily have you repeat everything, but can you give us some like landmark points in your life where you felt like that you had mental health struggles and how has that brought you to where you are now?
So I would say the very first time I encountered mental health wasn't necessarily with myself. It was my with my mum. My dad died on Christmas Day when I was 6 years old, and I saw my mum just go through severe depression. And I never understood what it was back then. I just knew mum was sad. I knew she wasn't always okay. She had panic attacks, anxiety attacks. She was worried about things, and I just realized my mum, even before my dad's death, even when I spoke to one of my family members, my mum just always has had an anxious disposition. So, I think my dad's death really dragged it out and pulled it out even more out of her. So that was one thing. I'd say the second thing was when my dad died. I used to sleep in between my mum and my dad, and I would be in the middle, my mum would be on the left, and my dad would be on the right. So when my dad was no longer there, my auntie came to stay with me, and she stayed in the bed with us. And I know she had great intentions, wasn't her fault in any way, shape, or form. But I woke up, and as I turned to my right, I was like, Dad, you're back. But it wasn't my dad, it was my auntie. And for a while, I couldn't sleep in my bed by myself. I think up until the age of 14, probably, or 12. I need to double check with my mum. I used to sleep with my mum very regularly. So I became quite claustrophobic when I went away to Pathfinders, which is almost like Christian Scouts or Seventh Day Adventist Scouts, because that was the religion I grew up in. It's a bit very conservative, a bit cult like. I don't align with that religion anymore, that practice. But yeah, I'm being honest with you. It was like a cult. I think it's got some great qualities to take away from it, but there was a lot of behaviors that were a bit cult like. But that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. I remember when I went camping and I tried to sleep in a tent by myself. I remember I just panicked. I had a full blown panic attack. And looking back, I realized it was actually a panic attack. I ripped the entire tent open because I was so scared I was trapped. And I never realized how terrified I was. So that would say those are the two most profound moments that I remember when I was young in regards to mental health. After that, obviously I had heartbreaks. I was a. Little bit sad. Then I would say my OCD moment was no. Would that be my OCD moment or would that be health anxiety? I'm going to put it down to health anxiety. So I was obsessed with this idea that I always had an STI or an STD. So anytime that I went to the toilet and it hurt in any way, shape or form, I'd cancel all my plans in the day and I'd run to the clinic and I'd go and get the help that I needed. I was terrified. I always had something. And even when I had the results, nothing could prove this unquenchable anxiety that I had. Nothing satisfied it. Nothing at all. And it moved on to HIV, that fear. But then I knew it got really bad when I paid £300, which is probably about $400 over for you in the US to have an understanding, for a same day test to prove I didn't have anything. And I was like, Shaun, this is not okay. You can't afford this, number one. But I didn't know this was anxiety, Erica. I thought this was just normal. When you live in your own world and you realize this isn't normal. So I'd say those are my encounters that I remember before my brain break moment, as we obviously understand within the OCD community.
Right. I mean, to me, that does sound. I mean, anxiety and OCD have so many overlaps, so there
Yeah.
probably were a lot of OCD components to that, especially, rushing to the clinic. Was there anything going on in your life around that time that you feel like made you more susceptible to kind of giving into that anxiety, or was it just one day your brain just broke, essentially?
Well, funnily enough, my first relationship, I was a virgin, and the girl that I lost my virginity to, she gave me chlamydia. I think she was cheating. It wasn't ever really confirmed, really and truly, but I was the only person, she was the only person I was sleeping with. But you don't get chlamydia. I didn't have it on my side, so it must have come from her, really and truly, because I
I
wasn't with
see.
anyone else. The second time was I caught chlamydia again from somebody I trusted. They had given it to me again, and then they say three times is a charm. Somebody else that I was with also gave it to me, and
Oh
I
my
think a lot of those times really just gave me an anxiety I couldn't understand because I was always worried, and there was this slight doubt slash I wouldn't say paranoia because I think paranoia is the wrong word. And I understand how powerful the word paranoia is, but it was an anxiety that people would always be lying to me, and I need to make sure I'm checked. And it would be a thing such as if I had the thought, I had to go and get checked. That was my mentality. If anything didn't feel right to me, I had to. So it was almost this just right feeling, I suppose.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I would say there was nothing in my life that was stressing me per se. It was just like this floating thought that would come in and out, if that makes any sort of sense.
Right. I mean, I think that this is kind of interesting and it describes a little bit of the relationship between trauma and OCD. Like, you don't have to have gone through trauma in order to have OCD, but I think for a lot of people, there has to be a traumatic event or like a series of traumatic events
Yeah.
for it to start being like, you know what, I think this is a pattern in my life and now I'm getting anxious about it. Because, I mean, three times, like from people that you trusted, that's definitely logical for you to be concerned about. And it's and then it kind of like snowballs into this thing that becomes really really tough to deal with. How long would you say that lasted for the health anxiety?
It lasted, I would say, up until 2019. And when I was seeing someone, I remember I just had this sudden fear that they had given me HIV. There was nothing logical about it, and I couldn't explain what it was. But when I got the test, I was like, oh, I'm okay. And that's when I was like, Sean, this needs to stop now. So I actually had to resist stuff myself in the sense of if I went to the toilet and it hurt a little bit, it could be dehydration. It could be a host of different things, right? That's when I had to stop myself and realize this wasn't okay. But I would say that's when it came to an end. That's when the health anxiety side came to an end. And I really try not to play into my health anxiety anymore because I just understand it is what it is. I caught COVID. I don't really worry about COVID. However, last year, during the time of my OCD diagnosis, I remember I tried to sleep, right? And it was at night, and I woke up with just this agonizing feeling in my chest. My chest was my left side of my chest was on fire. My friends came to take care of me. They fed me food and everything, but the minute I ate food, I went straight to the toilet. I felt horrendous. So the next day I woke up and I was like, no, no, this is not normal. There's something wrong with me. So I went to the hospital, and guess what I found out? That I had contracted pneumonia. And even the doctor was shocked
Oh
because
my
the
God.
doctor said, we don't know how you would have got it. But that didn't even play on my health anxiety. It's the second time I've caught pneumonia. The first time I caught it was when I was young and I was running around in a shirt to go and see my friend in the snow. So it's weird how that doesn't even, it plays on my mind every now and then where if I get a little chest pain, I'm like, oh shoot, is this COVID or is this pneumonia? And I just remember we're not going to buy into the story every single time. If it gets really bad, it gets really bad and I'll go and get checked. But we're not going to just feel a little something, run straight to the doctor or the clinic, whatever it might be.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if this is something just popped into my head as you were speaking about your like aches and pains. Um, as you know, like there in OCD, if once you're really in the thick of it, you can start to feel sensations and like urges that you didn't ask for, you didn't want, and it can kind of vary for any kind of theme OCD. But for me, at one point, I was having harm OCD thoughts, so I had a lot of intrusive thoughts about sharp objects and things hurting me. And I remember one time I kind of was resisting it so hard that I actually felt a sharp pain, where I was imagining it, and it really freaked me out because it was like, this is supposed to be just my mind, and my mind isn't supposed to be able to do these things to me and just imagine it. So I wonder if, like, do you feel like any of those pains you were having, do you feel like in a way your mind kind of brought them on, or do you feel as though they were all there, your mind just amplified it?
That is actually a really good question. I like the fact you've asked that because you can make a clear distinction between what actually happens in the body and what our mind conjures up. And I think it was probably more of, there were times when I was so worried that I would try and almost feel something. You know, when you try so hard to
Right.
find something to support your narrative. And I definitely think that was the case sometimes. I wouldn't say it was all the time, but there were times for sure when I could feel I was putting it on. And like you feel with OCD and harm OCD, for me, because I live mainly with harm OCD and SO, so sexual orientation OCD, when the groinal responses would come, I would check myself. I'd almost just make sure, you know, try to reinforce that I'm not attracted to guys or whatever it might be. That's what I'll try and do. So I think it was actually really a mix of the two. But that is actually such a good question, and I think it's going to be a really important question for anyone listening. That sometimes our mind can be so powerful, and we try to do anything to support the narrative we have in our head. We force ourselves to believe things physically and mentally and emotionally. Therefore,
Right. And it makes it worse a little bit.
yeah.
So, so I definitely understand that. So you said that you mainly, would you say you still struggle with harm OCD and SO, sexual orientation OCD, or are those things that you feel like you've mostly dealt with and you're just kind of maintaining your recovery stage right now?
I would say I've been maintaining my recovery stage really and truly. I'm really lucky to be in the position that I'm in. I think advocacy and activism has been a core part of my recovery in some senses. And I've probably had every single theme except religious OCD. I'm not very religious. I've had the existential OCD where I'm questioning, is this real? Nothing feels real. I've had depersonalization, derealization. I've had pedophilia OCD, but that's popped in and out. I don't really fear it. But I realized at one point, funny enough, and this is a podcast exclusive to your podcast, so take this, right? I realized, I think I was watching at some points pedophile hunting videos compulsively because I almost felt worried that I could have ever been something like that. And that was based on some trauma that happened to me when I was younger. And during therapy, I really had to address it and I had to confront it, and it was incredibly difficult. So I would say for the most part, I'm maintaining recovery, but a big part of my recovery has been helping other people. I'm always writing articles. I'm always developing new concepts around OCD and mental health in general. So I'm definitely in the maintenance phase, and I
Okay.
practice my maintenance by journaling, eating the right foods, speaking to the right people, but also protecting my peace of mind. And you and I spoke about this, Erica, that at the worst of my OCD, I couldn't be in support groups. The support groups were sometimes the most depressing place I could have ever been in because it was just people complaining 24/7 about OCD. I know how hard OCD is. OCD took my life from me, and I realized my breakdown was pending for over 5 to 6 years. But if I'm around all these people, I'm only amplifying what's going on in my brain. And this is why I think, even especially being in the OCD space, I want to help other people maintain recovery and achieve recovery by not being delusionally positive, but letting people know that when you're in certain spaces, you're only going to make your OCD worse because you're amplifying it. You're constantly focusing on the negatives. So I think for me, another part of maintaining my recovery has been being grateful, practicing that constant sense of gratitude, realizing that if it wasn't for OCD, I wouldn't have been able to connect with individuals such as yourself and all the other people I've been able to connect with. So just finding the positive that I could take in regards to my recovery and the diagnosis of OCD that I have had.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Do you feel as though, I guess with OCD in general, do you think there is something that has kind of led you to focusing on two themes in general? I mean, again, like this is kind of talking about like the relationship between trauma and OCD, and if there is a relationship between those two for you. But do you feel as though there have been factors in your life, like values that you've lived throughout your life, that have made you feel like, SOCD and harm OCD have been the ones that have come to the forefront the most?
Again, I'm loving the questions because it's very different to most podcasts that I've been on. So I like the fact you're asking this in such a way that I think will really help the listener. So I would say for myself, sexual orientation OCD probably really bothered me because of the way I grew up. I grew up in quite a conservative, religious Caribbean household. And Caribbean conservative Christian household. Wow, three C's, call that alliteration. God, I really want to get into spoken words, so that just reminds me of what I've noticed. But I would say it bothered me, especially because I grew up with this idea, and it was something that I was taught insidiously that being gay is something wrong, it's immoral, it's something that needs to be changed. So I think perhaps there's a reason why SOOCD really bothered me. Whereas now it just doesn't bother me at all. I've got gay friends. We talk about my sexual orientation OCD all the time. Some of my gay friends always say to me, "I'm here to trigger you," and I'm like, "Bro, I'm not triggered anymore by your existence. I no longer care." Do you know what I mean? It's been a
Yeah.
blessing, and I'll give you an example to give you context and for your listeners to get some sort of context. When I was in school, in primary school, so second primary school, so I was around 11, 10, I think. In sex education, they asked, "What do I think of gay people?" And apparently, my response at the time was, "I believe gay people should be put onto an island so they don't spread the disease." And apparently, I got really heated in class. I was arguing with the teachers. And I remember when they spoke to my mum asked me, "Where did I get that idea from?" And I said, "Well, I got it from the Bible and I got it from you. That's what I was taught. I was a young kid. These are the ideas that I had, and I never really got in trouble for it. It was what it was." And I kind of just went on with life until I had that dream of the white guy in boxers, and I woke up with this 100% conviction I was gay. And on top of that, I was in the modeling industry at the time. And when I was in the modeling industry, I was getting a lot of male attention. So, on top of the question of my sexual identity, I would ask myself questions such as, what are these gay guys noticing about me that I'm not noticing in myself? So I felt like they were noticing that I must have been gay. So therefore, that would have made me gay, and I'm hiding the truth. And in my head, I've had, when I speak to other guys with sexual orientation, obviously, we laugh about this, but I've had stuff in my head such as I need to write my coming out story. I need to write the story when I come out the closet to everybody. And it just doesn't align with me, but yet it plagued me. As I said, it doesn't bother me anymore. Harm OCD. One of my theories, and this is just a theory, I need to go away and solidify this or verify this and make this valid. But I think a lot of my fear of harming other people came from the idea that I believe in society, especially as a black man, we're quite seen as perpetrators of violence, and especially being a man in general. I think with the Me Too movement and the rise of feminism, which has had fantastic effects, something I've spoken to a lot of OCD practitioners and therapists and clinic runners, supervisors about, a lot of men now come in fear that they're going to harm a woman, or fear that they're going to get cancelled, or fear that they could end up doing the wrong thing. So I think it might have come out as a result of that, because one of my biggest fears in my life is ever to be called a rapist or to ever harm a woman. Also, because I grew up with a very strong village of women around me. So I think it's a host of different reasons, really and truly. And I think it's a multivaried answer. So I don't think I can pin it down to one thing with harm OCD, but I think with SOOCD, it's a little bit more. I think I can make a clearer pinpoint, I suppose, in some aspects.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I actually kind of relate to the point about what you said. What are these gay men seeing in me that are making them think I'm gay? I was talking to my therapist actually the other day about, for me, it's like kind of the opposite. It's like, what are these gay women seeing in women that I'm not seeing? And like, should I be seeing that? Because I don't know if you really, are involved in, there's this kind of like girl culture thing where everyone's beautiful.
Yeah, no,
Like, you just
yeah,
say, like, everyone's beautiful, all shapes and sizes, like men are beautiful, but it's like mainly like women supporting women saying
of
they're
course.
beautiful, which I believe. And so I do see everyone as like kind of this general like beautiful. And then in my head I'm like, well, what is like, is this person like a special beautiful? Like what's the like beautiful thing about her that would make someone who is gay think that she's, attractive? And then it starts to kind of like snowball into this, what is attraction essentially? And I feel like that can really just kind of go on forever. So I can kind of relate to that point. And then the other thing I wanted to go off of was you mentioned your identity as a Black man and from an immigrant family, right? So I'd like to know more about how that has kind of played a role into your advocacy, and also how has that played a role in you seeking help for your mental health issues?
Yeah, thank you for also sharing a bit of your story because I think quite often it's hard to find people we're not always going to 100% relate to people. Sometimes we can, sometimes we
Right.
don't. But hearing somebody else on the other side has had a very similar experience, it draws a lot of parallels that we can sit upon. And
Yeah.
within my community, I actually just pitched an article to the International OCD Foundation, which is almost like a call to action for the Black community to come together and speak about OCD. Because ever since speaking about my story, I've had so many Black people reach out to me and say, "Wow, I'm not the only one with OCD," or I've waited for somebody to speak up about this," or "I thought I was the only Black person with OCD." So it's really massively informed a lot of the work that I do, and I feel a sense of gratitude, a sense of duty and responsibility to speak out about OCD and to really do as best as I can because I no longer fear the consequences of what people think about me in regards to OCD and the thoughts that I have. And there's too many people out there that suffer in silence, and especially in the Black and Caribbean community of which I'm from, we don't really speak about mental health, and it's because there's this fear that our freedom will be taken away. And that's another article I'm working on to try and get people to understand what makes the Black experience of mental health different, perhaps, to the white experience. That once upon a time ago, a lot of ethnic minorities, especially Black people, had to fear their freedom. And any element of weakness or any element of mental instability was seen as a failure, as a weakness, but it was criminalized, it was punished, essentially, you know? When you look at a lot of the inhumane African American practices and practices on African Americans, that's another reason why there's a lot of distrust in the community to speak to mental health professionals and providers and so much more. So there's a lot of different layers that come to mind as to why I speak about what I speak about and why I try to really reach out to the communities that I do. And
Hmm.
what I realized looking at the research was every OCD does not discriminate in regards to anybody, regardless of your class, gender, race, sex, background, can get OCD. It's just the way it discriminates is in the sense of who gets to speak about it. Like we know the OCD space is mainly white and female, and it's not any fault of that space. It's a whitewash space. And as a result of that, when you don't see people that look like you, quite often it can be hard for you to speak up. It can be hard for you to want to be that voice. So what I decided to do was to add to the conversation. I could complain all day about no one speaking up for my community, but I wanted to be the change that I wanted to see within my community. And I have a WhatsApp group now with 36 Black people in it now, which doesn't sound like a lot to some people, but that's huge.
It's a
It's
lot.
huge for my
Yeah.
community. So I'm trying to create a long-lasting, meaningful change that will that will create a legacy for the children coming up now that they can be like, oh, I know a couple of people with OCD, and there's a space that we can talk, you know. So that's a lot of why I do what I do and why I'm so passionate about getting the community to speak up. And I want to see more other ethnic minorities speak up about it because it's not just the Black community, it's the South Asian, East Asian, all the other Asian communities, it's the other ethnic minorities that need to speak up as well. We need it. We desperately do need it.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely see a lot of parallels in what you're saying with the what we call it in the States. I don't know what they call it in the UK, but the AAPI community, which is Asian American Pacific Islander. There's also huge stigmas against mental health in the Asian American community, and I'm trying to find this. Uh, yeah, I'm trying to find this post I made actually back in October. But in the US, at least compared to other ethnic and racial minorities, Asian Americans are the least likely to seek treatment for mental health. And that's based on a national survey on drug use and health from 2020. So it was interesting because uh, I don't know how it varies across like other countries, but it seems like in general, you know, ethnic minorities are less likely to overall seek help for mental health issues, and I think that has that effect on advocacy, where you're just not seeing as many people that, like yourself, speaking up about these kind of things. So I guess what is something that you feel like? I guess sometimes I get pushback about let's with sexual orientation OCD, right? It's very binary in a sense. Usually, it's like a straight person who is like, I'm scared I'm gay, or another like a gay person thinking, I'm scared I'm straight. And on my video with special books by special kids, I saw some comments about people feeling sad to hear me talking about this fear because it doesn't acknowledge kind of the existence of queer people who are in between, who might be bi or pansexual, and kind of like this lack of, they just didn't really understand why the OCD brain doesn't work that way. So is there anything that you could say that would help people like that understand? Or do you think that this is kind of an issue in itself, that we need more education on the existence of LGBTQIA people, and there needs to be a cultural shift? Like, what are your thoughts on that in general?
There does need to be a cultural shift in the sense of there's a lot of people in society who still aren't accepted, and you can't force acceptance on people. I think it does take a lot of time, and even if we look at being an ethnic minority, that's one intersection within itself, right? That's another really big issue. And for a lot of people that don't understand OCD, it's an anxiety disorder. So it attacks your morals and values. The thoughts are ego dystonic. And especially when you look at the intersections with sexual identity and gender identity, for people who believe so strongly in their identity, sometimes it's not even the thought of being gay or bisexual, whatever it might be. It's more so sometimes the loss of identity that is actually the real big issue. It's you wake up one day and you just suddenly feel like you no longer know who you are. Now, on one of the reels I made, I'm not sure if you saw it, Erica, when I was on a podcast talking about sexual orientation OCD, this guy commented on my post, and he basically just said to me, "It's because you're afraid of being gay." And I said, maybe it is in some aspects. I said, and I can accept that. But I said, in some other aspects, I think it's the loss of my identity. And I think he wanted to be right more than he wanted to be anything else. I didn't think he really wanted a conversation. And what happened was he DM'd me, or we started speaking, and he sent me a research study to try and prove that sexual orientation is just homophobia. And I don't think he actually thought I was going to read the study. I don't think he actually thought I was going to read the study. I read the study, and the very first line was, "It is inconclusive to say that people that live with sexual orientation OCD are homophobic. Yes, there may be elements as a result of homosexuality being in some parts demonized in society, but it is inconclusive evidence." And I just took the extract and I sent it back to him, and he didn't reply. This is what I mean sometimes. I think sometimes people want to find things that support their narrative so much that they don't realize it's more of a bias than it is anything else. And I think for the people out there who don't understand why maybe it doesn't talk about the intersections between being bisexual and queer, the difference is, I would find quite often, would be the struggle to accept yourself is you know who you are. It's you're struggling to come out in society. But I think then the next difference you would ask yourself for people that live with OCD is we feel like we know who we are, but we're trying to find evidence to prove this is who we are. So, for example, when I thought that I was gay, I tried to watch gay porn. It didn't do anything for me, right? And I'd be like, wait, why am I not reacting? What's going on? I'm supposed to be gay. And like, Erica, since we're having an open, honest conversation, there's a lot of guys who can relate to this. If I had sex with someone and I got an erection, I would sit there and ruminate and be a bit like, how am I able to get an erection? I'm supposed to be gay. And then if I couldn't get erect, I'd be like, this means I'm gay, or this means I've got erectile dysfunction. Nothing I did could prove as a solid piece of evidence that I was gay. So that's what I would say makes it a bit different. There's a difference between accepting yourself and the difference between you feel like this is who you are, but really and truly there's no evidence to prove it. That's why it's anxiety. Anxiety is almost like sitting in a rocking chair and expecting to make progress. That's the best way I often describe it to people. So that's what I would say is the key distinction between the two.
Yeah, it's interesting that this person went so far as to try to start a conversation with you in your DMs, but then just not continue the conversation. I think it's hard, right? Because I think people, I mean, I don't know everyone who has sexual orientation OCD, but I used to have this fear as well that it was because I was homophobic, but which logically like doesn't really make any sense, I guess, if I'm thinking about my life and the people I interact with. I have three of my best friends are gay, and I have plenty of friends who are queer, and you can talk all you want about like internalized homophobia, but it's just kind of like the way that I live my life is not in a way that I would consider homophobic, but it just gets in your brain because you see people like this saying like you're afraid of being gay, and I think that is actually, it is a valid concern for people who are living in societies maybe where being gay is criminalized, and maybe they're having sexual orientation OCD, but that doesn't mean that they're gay in themselves. It's just like the fear of being found out as gay, even if you're not, maybe is so strong that you start to have these thoughts. So I think that still doesn't even really, necessarily take away from the existence and kind of the I guess the legitimacy of sexual orientation OCD. But your interaction with him kind of helps me get into my next question, which is just how do you deal with negative feedback as someone who is a public speaker, public figure, an advocate? How do you deal with people who are just critical for no reason or maybe for good reason?
I think it's always a learning lesson, and I often say to people, you can't be famous without having some sort of paparazzi. I'm not saying I'm famous, but there's a trade-off, and I understand in the things that I do, I'm always going to have people that are going to have an opinion. People are allowed to have an opinion. You've got a free thought, you've got free speech, you've got a brain that's allowed to think, and to dare to think is sometimes to dare to be offensive to some people. And if you look at my first TED Talk, I had so many negative comments as a result of what I spoke about, which was the need for a curriculum that really centers the black experience. And I think in America, I would have done a lot better with something like that. Now, when it comes to negative feedback, I do quite like it because it makes me go away and think of something different. Because I'm not perfect, I've still got so much to learn, and I'm not arrogant ever enough to believe that I know everything. The more I've learned is the more I've realized I know nothing at all. It's one of the most humbling experiences to go away and do research and reading. But as I said, I understand what I talk about as a byproduct. I'm going to have negativity. I can't always have positivity. I'll be living in a fantasy, and I'd rather live in reality than a fantasy. And I think for a lot of advocates out there and activists sometimes, they feel like any sort of negative feedback is bad, which I understand why they would, but sometimes you are where you need to be for a reason, but don't always expect everybody to agree with you. You're going to have pushback, especially because of the things that we speak about. Even when I talk about pedophilia OCD, which is not something I talk about often, but I speak about with my friends. I said to my friend, would he ever tell his story? And he said, no way. He said he would probably never tell his story about pedophilia OCD because people would just tell him he's a pedophile. But I said to him, it's from those important conversations you're having, we can start to pull people out of the darkness and stop them hiding. Do you know? For example, there's some of the practitioners I've spoken to. They speak about white people having race OCD, for example. We've got to stop these people hiding, but there's consequences that do come as a result of that. And I think for myself, I'm willing to wear the consequences in order to help people. People are going to judge me, but I'd rather give them the truth and they can go and do what they want with their own truth as a result of that. So I understand there's going to be negative feedback. I understand not everybody is going to agree with me, but I like it. It sharpens my tools and it makes me go away and be a lot more critical on myself in good ways and bad ways. But I still show myself some grace and gratitude. But I quite like it. I enjoy it. It's quite strange, but I don't know if you ever heard of David Goggins when he says when he has haters. So David Goggins is like an ultra marathon runner, but he's also like a motivational speaker and so much more. And he said when he gets negative feedback, he'll record it on a tape or his phone or whatever, and he'll go out and run or do whatever, and he'll listen to it, the feedback over
My
and
God.
over and over again.
Oh,
But
God.
that's a man with an incredibly strong mind, and that's mental fortitude at its highest. So I'm not saying go and do that, but it just reminded me of that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I don't know if I could do that. I think I'm maybe I'm a little too fragile to do that, but props to him. To your point, I do think pedophilia OCD is really under talked about. So I think people who, I was thinking about this with pedophilia OCD. It's really hard to talk about as someone who is an advocate and not a clinician. I think clinicians have like the backing of their institutions and their patients to kind of talk about it in a way that people would find more credible. But when you're just a person who's wanting to share about your pedophilia OCD experience, you're just not going to have as much support from a community of people who have like done studies and research on it. I think so. I think that's kind of what stops people from sharing about it. As like, I think there's a lot of value in having advocates who are clinicians, but I also think there's a lot of value from people who just have the lived experience. And I think pedophilia OCD is really lacking that because just of how highly stigmatized it is and how easily it is to be misinterpreted. I think people don't even want that to be the name, pedophilia OCD. Like, what does that even mean? Does that mean you're obsessed with being a pedophile, or does that mean that you're obsessed with what your thoughts mean about you because you're scared to be a pedophile? And I think there's this huge misunderstanding about it overall. I think I can't remember what his full name, Nathan something. He's like an OCD therapist, and he posts on YouTube, and he had this
Nathan
whole
Pearson,
video.
I think it is.
Yeah, I think so.
OCD and
Yeah, he
anxiety
posted about
online, something
pedophilia.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and he posted about pedophilia OCD. It was like a very informative, kind of clinical explanation of it. And then Steven Crowder ended up getting his hands on it
Oh
and
dear.
basically blasted him on Twitter as a pedophile supporter and made all these comments about him on his podcast. And surprisingly, actually, I went to the video where he mentioned him, Nathan Pearson, and I really hope we're getting his name right, in his podcast. And the comments were actually
Let me
like,
check. Let me
hey,
check if it's Nathan Pearson. I
okay,
think it
okay.
is.
Yeah, I don't want to just be like throwing out someone's name.
Nathan
Yeah,
Peterson.
I was seeing.
Yeah,
Ah,
it's Nathan
There
Peterson.
you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nathan
But
Peterson.
but we
who
were
have-
close.
Right. We had the combination. Um, so on the video for Steven Crowder's video, some of his supporters had commented, "Hey, Steven, I know that you just like don't really understand OCD, but like I've had this form of OCD before, and it's actually really debilitating, and no one understands, and I think you should actually take a second look at what this guy is trying to say." I was so shocked because like Steven Crowder's like his fans are not the kind of people who normally support. I feel like, I don't know, just like issues that usually are kind of deemed as more liberal, like mental health issues. But to see that his comment section was trying to call him out a little bit was actually kind of, it was a little bit redeeming, I guess. So there's that portion of what I was going to say. And then the other thing you said that stuck out at me, like, what is race OCD? I've never heard of that.
Really? Have you never heard of race OCD? So
No,
race OCD.
never heard of, no.
I'm so shocked that you say that because race OCD is the fear that you're a racist, actually. So there was a young
Okay, I
girl
see.
on TikTok. She took down the video, and I don't want to call her out on her name because I think she's past it. But there was a girl on TikTok who she put up a video saying that I'm terrified. I have race OCD, and I'm terrified I'm a racist. I get all these racist thoughts when I'm around people of color. And people stitched her video. People made comments. People did all sorts and just said, "You're just a racist. Accept what you are." And like what you said, Erica, we need people to call out these people in the sense of to be like, go and do some research. The fact you're terrified you're a racist tells me you're not a racist. It tells me that you are the exact opposite of what your brain is trying to tell you that you are. So race OCD, yeah, is the incessant fear of being a racist, having racist thoughts, having, calling people whatever, and so all sorts of racist language and so on. And I've had a little bit of race OCD every now and then pop up, but it just doesn't bother me. So yeah, there's all sorts of themes out there. There's schizophrenia OCD, there's bipolar OCD. It's whatever your worst fears are, you can attach to OCD, basically.
Yeah, that makes more sense now that you explain it. I think I've had like kind of thoughts like that as well pop into my head. I mean, it all plays back. A lot of these kind of themes of OCD that are focused on social issues, I feel like really play back into moral scrupulosity overall. And I think cancel culture has really, really heightened that component of OCD. I mean, it's really interesting how OCD themes kind of fluctuate based on what's important in society. I think the reason why OCD was associated with hand washing for so long was because I think they're used like the public awareness of OCD started to increase more in like the 80s and 90s, and that was also around the time of like the AIDS epidemic, and I think people started to just like that was kind of like what a lot of people with OCD latched onto, and there was more just cases of is like we're scared of this like public awareness of AIDS, so we don't want to get that. So now OCD is also more the public awareness, so it's correlated with that. And I think now because of cancel culture and how it's like all over the place, I think that's kind of what it's attached itself to. I do need something to back my claims, but I'm pretty sure that this is correlated. Um,
It's
so,
it's funny you say that because that's another piece I'm working on. I'm working on how cancel culture cancels out certain mental health conversations because there's this thought policing, there's this thought editing, and we live in cancel culture, but we need to live in redemption culture where people are allowed to make mistakes. People can't be perfect, you know, and people will be like, "There's no room for racism, homophobia, transphobia, and so much more." But who made you the moral adjudicator, the judge? Who made you the person that we define what is right and wrong? Because once upon a time ago, what was wrong now was right then. And I think a lot of people who are socially progressive and well-meaning, they're causing a lot of issues in society, really and truly, beyond the people they're trying to fight against. And sometimes in fighting evil, we become the very evil we hated because we become so extreme
right.
within our views. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of the discourse I'm seeing conservatives have, especially conservatives who are like public speakers, well, they'll say that, you know, a lot of them were like ex-liberals, ex-progressives, and then they'll
Yeah.
turn into being conservative. And they'll usually pinpoint it was because, you know, for a political social platform that's supposed to be all about accepting and being inclusive of others, they were not very accepting or inclusive of any opinions I had that even questioned what the norms were in that community. And so it's kind of like now you're just completely shutting out anyone who has a completely different opinion than you. So that's not going to help bring anyone together because now you've really created a like us versus them thing. I'm hoping that more debates on social media and just, I guess, more people who are courageous enough to speak out about it will help that kind of discourse. But I'm not sure where it's headed in the next 10 years, where this is all going to go. What do you think?
I think we're going to get to a better place when there's people, not to blow my own trumpet, but I'm someone who dares to think differently. I dare to think, and by daring to think, I dare to be offensive to some people. Not everybody's going to agree with me, but I'm prepared to take on the consequences of thinking very differently. I'm probably a lot more liberally inclined than I am anything else, but I can see how the liberal mob quite often can alienate people and push them to the other side without realizing there's this deeply entrenched mob culture and this mob mentality that sits within liberalism that is quite toxic, really and truly. And it's the antithesis of the term liberal. It's more illiberal in that sense. So I think the world is going to move into a better place, and I think most people are starting to really see the issues of people. And there's a saying that my friends once said, there's madness in individuals is rare, but madness in crowds is common. And it's this idea when you band a lot of people together that think the same way, they almost
Right.
amplify all of their same views and they push themselves further down into the echo chambers, and their rhetoric is ultimately toxic. And I believe that intersects into a lot of mental health conversations and so much more. And what you and I have already spoken about, a conversation is the best place to start. Even if you and I don't agree on a lot of things, I dare to hear your opinion. I dare to hear your lived experience. And a lot of right-wing conservative people, when they hear woke or lived experience or racism, they all banish it to the underground. But you need to have these conversations even if you don't want to hear it. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of what conservatives talk about is this victim mentality within the more liberal progressive crowd, which I think I've been kind of exploring that more in my brain about, you know, is that something that has held me back? I mean, I don't agree with like when you call it victim mentality when someone has like very clearly been wronged by societal infrastructures, but I have thought about like how does that play a role in me not being able to achieve what I want to do? Is it because I'm so worked up on like what did this person really mean when they looked at me this way? Like, because that's kind of how it turns out for me is like if I am in a so-called victim mentality, I kind of automatically when something goes wrong in like a customer service setting, I just like think about whether it's because of like my race or my gender, and I feel like it's like not a productive way to live unless you really want to do something about it and like prove that that was why this person like so-called discriminated against you. But so I feel like it's interesting to take like things that speak to you from both sides or all sides and just see where you can go with it. Like I don't think, you know, I think OCD and just society in general, human nature has this tendency to really focus on labels. And we need to be one label or another. But I think it's better to just kind of hold those labels not so tightly and just be open, I guess. So yeah, I mean, I think I just remembered something else I was gonna ask you because you were like, I dare to think and all this stuff. Do you have any hot takes? Any like controversial takes on OCD that you think other people might not agree with?
Ooh, let's go. I would say one of the biggest things I don't agree with when it comes to the OCD community is this idea that. So, all right, I'm going to use an example. I wrote an article that was essentially saying to the company Swig Life what they were saying about OCD. They were mocking it, obsessive cup disorder is what they said. And I wrote a letter. I wrote another article, which was an open letter to the CEO asking her. I was calling her out, but one of the key components in the article was I was calling her in. So I think quite often, whilst we call people out, we don't have a call to action. We just want them to apologize. I want you to apologize, but I want you to go and put your money where your mouth is and show me what that you understand. Let us come and deliver workshops and literature on why OCD isn't something to be mocked. We don't mock cancer. We don't mock other certain illnesses and so much more. So why do we mock a mental illness that has taken people's lives as well? So that's one thing I'd say. But I'm not sure if you remember in the New York Times, there was an article written called, I think it's something along the lines of "I'm so OCD, why I don't have an issue with it." And there was an author, the writer was making the point that essentially she believes when people say "I'm so OCD" that they're celebrating neurodivergency, but it may not be in the ways we understand it. So I thought I read the article and I just looked on the internet and I could see people's responses were a bit, well, they hated the article. They said this wouldn't have come from somebody that has OCD and so much more. So I messaged her on LinkedIn and I said to her, I'm thankful for your perspective. What inspired your perspective? I wanted to hear it before I came to a judgment, right? And the author told me I actually have OCD as well. And she said, this is how I've learned to cope with it rather than taking a grievance essentially of everybody that says it. And I was like, wow, what an interesting take. I may not fully agree with it, but that shows you that everybody handles their recovery differently. They handle their recovery
Yeah.
differently, and she might be in a very different place compared to somebody else who they're in a really bad place of OCD. So what I thought was a hot take from that was we can't police how people handle their own OCD. And I think we also can't essentially police how people view their recovery in that sense. She viewed it in the way she did. It probably went against the grain of what most people with OCD would understand, but I appreciated the difference in her perspective. And when I said to people, she actually does also have OCD, people were like, how could she have OCD and talk like that? And I said, well, first of all, because you're presuming there's one way to view things, and that's not the way everyone operates. So there was a slight mob mentality and a slight hive mindset even within that recovery. So that's one of my hot takes. I
Yeah.
want to diversify the way we see things, you know?
That's interesting. Yeah, that's really cool of you to reach out to her because I probably, I mean, I don't know if you saw my face, but I was a little bit like, I don't know
Yeah.
about this. I don't. I've had people say that to me in real life, and like what I say to them is like, I had a colleague actually. She was like, "Oh, I'm just so OCD about this kind of stuff," and I had reached out to her afterwards, and I said, hey, like, I don't know if you actually have OCD, and, I just want to acknowledge that, you very well may have, but, like, the way in which you used it during the staff meeting, like, or the meeting that we had, felt a little bit dismissive to me, and I didn't feel quite right, and I just been speaking as someone who does have OCD, so I don't want to minimize your experience either if you are trying to use it that way. And she was like, no, I don't have it. I just like, I really just do like being clean. And she's like, but I'm sorry that I used it that way. And I'll try not to use it again. So it was like, I don't want to just automatically assume that someone who says that does not have OCD because like you said, like it could be a coping mechanism. It could be whatever way they've decided their recovery is. And I think it has a lot of parallels with people of color trying to reclaim words or characteristics that their community has had. And I think that's, I think it's valid. Like everyone copes in a different way. I think people just are afraid that it's going to really change public perceptions of OCD probably, which is also valid. So it's hard, and I think constant conversation, like you said, is what we need to really hash out these details.
Absolutely.
So
Wim Hof said, I think it's conversational criticism polishes the diamond that is the truth. So the more conversations you have, the more you can criticize certain ideas, and you can get to maybe some sort of universal truth. And I'll give you an example. Even when I went to the gym the other day, and this guy I'm really good friends with. Like, we're proper chill. I love the guy, proper nice guy. And him and I were talking about people in the gym doing meme worthy stuff. Like, some people in the gym do some crazy exercises that make no sense. And he told me there was this lady that went onto the bench and she wouldn't put any of her stuff down on the bench. She said she just wouldn't do it. And for example, her water bottle couldn't be on the floor. A water bottle had to be on another bench. And he said she must have OCD. And I could have taken issue with his statement, but I used it as a time to educate. I repeated to him, I was like, oh, that could be potentially cleaning, contamination, OCD. I said, but I'm not really too sure. And I explained to him, I said, oh, I also have OCD as well, but my OCD manifests very differently. And I think if I came on the offensive and I screamed and I shouted at him, it's not an opportunity for me to educate. It probably would put his back up against the wall even more and could probably cause more mockery. Whereas I think when he speaks to somebody that has lived experience that he values and respects, I think he would have a very different mentality and a mindset. And I'll give you another example. When I was out at a shop, I was speaking to this young lady who worked in the store, and she's a psychology student. And I said to her, "Oh, I'm hoping to become a therapist at some point." She was like, "Oh, what inspires you to be a therapist?" And I said, "Well, I have OCD." And before I could even answer, she was like, "Well, don't look over there; it's not clean." And I said to her, "Well," I said, "Look." I said, some people would be really offended by that statement, but I said, where I am in my recovery, it's water off a duck's back. But I said, OCD is about intrusive, obsessive thoughts. And I said, the way my OCD manifested was through harm and sexual orientation. And I explained it. And you could see she really actually appreciated the education, because I could have assumed as a psychology student, she should know better. But that's my narrow-minded thinking, to assume that she has access to all these different books and she's going to take time to read everything about OCD. That's not right. So I used that as an opportunity to educate rather than to incriminate. And it had a better response than I thought. But I also understand that not everybody has that, emotional labor or the mental labor to want to do that. I respect everyone, but that's how I handle things. I use it as an opportunity to educate and inform rather than incriminate. So we're all on our own different journeys. And I think that's a potential thing in the OCD community we do need to speak about.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've had everything you say. I always have like a kind of similar experience popping up in my head. So I'll just like share one last one with you, and then we can wrap it up because we're approaching about an hour. I did couples therapy, like just one session, a few months ago. Because I was like, it was like a free session, I think. I can't really remember how this worked, honestly. And it was on like BetterHelp's sister website, and it was really, really terrible connection. But the one thing that I did say with this therapist, he was like asking me about just like, I was with my partner too, and we were both just kind of like on this call. And I explained to this therapist, I do have OCD, so I have a lot of intrusive thoughts and like da-da-da-da. And I don't know if it's because the connection cut off, but he was like, oh, it's very interesting that you tell me that you have OCD, but that you also are very like disorganized and that you're late a lot. Because to me, like, I always understood someone with OCD as being very organized and very structured. And I was like, I remember being I just was like dumbfounded. Like, you're a therapist who has been in the practice for 30 years, and I just told you what OCD is to me, and you still are basically trying to say that me having OCD cancels out any kind of tardiness or lack of organization I have. And I mean, I wasn't immediate. I didn't lash out at him. I didn't say, oh my God, how dumb are you? I said, well, actually, like, OCD for me shows up as intrusive thoughts and da-da-da-da-da, so it's not really the same thing. And maybe what you're describing is OCPD, because I think people equate those two a lot. People always think OCD means OCPD, it's just not. So I actually think that a lot of people who say, like, I'm so OCD, actually mean, like, I'm so OCPD. I really think that's what they actually mean.
Yeah.
They just don't know what the difference is.
And I think what's really funny is OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, affects the people around you, whereas OCD really has more of an effect on you as a person internally. And I think that's one of the biggest distinctions to make. People with OCPD some of them really struggle to even maintain friendships. Some people with OCD do as well,
Right.
but obsessive
Right.
compulsive personality disorder really affects your relationships with people even more than OCD can. And that's a key thing to, you're right, it's a key distinction to be made. But do you see what I mean by us having a conversation? Someone listening now could be like, oh, maybe that is what I mean, or maybe that's what the person has. This is what I mean, why
Right.
we need to come to a place where we got to have the conversations we don't want to have. We can try and educate people as much as we can, but ultimately we have to let people do what they want to do.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think, we can control our reactions, and maybe we can't control how we initially feel about things, but we can question why we feel about things, and maybe not too much. No, not to the rumination point, but it's okay to to disagree and think about a little bit what you can add to the
Absolutely.
conversation. All right, so yeah, we're gonna wrap this up, but I have one last question for you, which is just how are you going to show yourself kindness this week?
So I did my face mask earlier, so I feel good. I got some spots I need to
That's
get
true.
rid of. You know,
Is it a clay mask?
no, I don't really use clay. So I've got dry skin naturally. So I try to use things to hydrate, and so I use salicylic acid. I use that kind of
Oh,
mask because
okay.
it's exfoliating, helps to clean out the impurities and so much more. But how I'm also
Cool.
planning to show myself kindness this week, I'm gonna go out with a couple of friends and just relax and enjoy my time with them, find out what's going on with them. So I'm trying to practice that a lot more in general, to be honest with you. And I think another way I'm going to show myself kindness is do as much work as I can to give myself the breadth of freedom that I need to, rather than procrastinating, and then that's me being unkind to myself, really and truly. And I realized procrastination is a form of anxiety for sure. I'm avoiding something, so I'm gonna do what I need to do to earn the time back that I can to be able to have fun. So that's what I'm doing. What about yourself?
Awesome. Well, I mean, it's my week off between jobs right now, so I'm having a little staycation. So I already got a massage. Honestly, it was kind of awful. Like, I feel like the guy was way too heavy-handed for me, but maybe I'll get another massage. I don't know,
Was
and
it a
just
sports
try to
massage or
relax. It was a deep tissue massage,
deep tissue
which
massages
I
are
thought I
not
could.
supposed to be comfortable?
Okay, well, I feel like usually they're okay, but this
What,
guy
a
was
deep
like,
tissue?
and yeah. Maybe it wasn't a
Wow.
good idea. I don't know. I mean, I thought it was gonna be. I definitely felt my body felt less tense afterwards, but the entire time it
Yeah,
was
no,
very
deep
hard.
tissue massages
And
are
his hand.
very painful.
Good. Okay. Well, at least it did what it did then. It did what it was supposed to do. But yeah, I mean, even his hands were like, he kept putting lotion on to try to like make it softer, but his hands are rough, so that it just like always everything felt very rough. So we'll see. Yeah, maybe I'll get another massage, just not as intense as that one. Um. Anyway, anything you want to add that we didn't cover?
No, not really. I think this has been a great conversation, and I hope to anyone listening, this has been productive. It's made you think about things very differently. And I'm just happy that I've had a chance to come onto your podcast to connect with you. As I was saying to you, I'm all about meaningful connections at the moment. So I'm hoping we can maintain our connection beyond OCD, because there's a whole big world as well beyond OCD. So I'm grateful right now, and I want a lot of people to not lose hope and to realize you're never alone. You and I are examples of you can still live a fruitful, successful, and a happy life with OCD, and you're strong in spite of your OCD. So keep up, keep going.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you making time to come on, and I'm hoping everyone gets something from this. So thanks again, Shaun, and thanks everyone for listening. This is a Just Say Maybe podcast, and I'll see you all next time.